Hello, it's John. Hello, everybody. I hope that you are having a good day, good Monday. It already seems like we're on to Tuesday. We've had so much going on today. I met with some of the evaluators earlier. Um, and let's see. There we go. Sorry. I met with some of the evaluators earlier and I shared a little bit of this information, so hopefully they won't be too bored. Um, but just know that you are welcome. I'll try to stop for questions, but if you have a burning question and I'm talking, put it in the chat and John will let me know. But I'll also try to give you guys a chance to ask questions. Um, it's unlikely there are any stupid questions. There's going to be something that you want to ask that others are interested in. So just be thinking about what you want to know more about. So I am Jennifer Coffey. I oversee the State Personnel Development Grant Program. I also have projects myself. Overseeing the program means that I work on the GEPRA measures, the Government Performance Results Act measures. And those are the data that we give to Congress to let them know how we're doing. Um, and I also get to work with the project officers here and think about the OSEP conference and how we're going to gather there and put together the SPDIG national meeting. So lots of fun stuff. Um, prior to coming to OSEP, I was at a state education agency. Prior to that, I was getting my PhD. And one of the things I was really interested in was sustainability and fidelity. And we put a lot of money into education, probably not enough, but often a lot of money. And how do you make it really effective? So that's how I came to this work and why I care a lot about evaluation. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
I would love to. My name is John Lind. I'm housed at the University of Oregon currently. Super excited to be here. One thing that I tell people that not everybody probably knows about me, but I'm proud about, mostly because I worked my way back hard towards it because it certainly wasn't handed to me on a platter, but I'm a third generation graduate of the University of Oregon College of Education. So super excited to be able to still be here and raise my family in Eugene, Oregon. In the past, I was a special educator, primarily focused on working with adjudicated youth, high school aged youth. So that's my background. I've been working on the SIG network with Jennifer, helping to get resources out to various members of the SPDIG community, and of course, helping to network among the SPDIG community. I can't believe how long it's been now, Jennifer. I've probably been affiliated with it since 2015, so 10 years now, I guess. So that's a brief introduction for myself, and welcome everyone.
Thanks, John. All right, so let's get into it again. Feel free to put questions in the chat. I'll also try to stop here and there to ask you if you have any questions. So, you can jot them down just so you're ready. Um, yeah, let's get going. So, we do these APR guidance webinars once a year after the the direction or the Dear Colleague letter for the APR comes out. And just know that we did also have a webinar to share the results of the Government Performance Results Act, the GEPRA data. It's recorded, and John, I don't know if you would mind putting the link to that recording into the chat. Not everyone got to go to that, and you may be wondering, so I'm quickly going to go over those results again, just to give you all some context for your APR and little reminders. So again, hopefully you don't mind the duplication, but there are too many times I talk to people and they don't know about certain things that we've talked about, and I just want to make sure as much as possible we're all singing from the same choir sheet. All right, so purpose of today's webinar, I want to provide those GEPRA results, talk about just a little reminder about where we did really well overall in the program measures and where there were challenges. I want to make sure that you're prepared for the APR deadline and that you have a good knowledge of what you're supposed to do. And then Fidelity Fridays. So I don't know why I have a question mark there. It should just be Fidelity Fridays, period. But question mark on other topics. If there are things that you would love to include in Fidelity Fridays, we are open. And that's for program measure two, which we'll get into. So learning targets today, just to make sure you're feeling comfortable with program measure two and the kind of fidelity measure you will be reporting, and that you know where to get to the APR resources. APR being annual performance report. So my intention for our time together is that you have a better sense of APR expectations and the resources that will help you meet those expectations. So this is the simplified SPDIG theory of action. This is why we exist. That each of you in your projects will provide good professional development, effective professional development, evidence-based. I just have good here. As a result of that professional development, the training, coaching, data systems, getting administrators supported, etc. Because of all that, the folks you work with, let's say teachers, that they are able to use the evidence-based practice that you are focused on, that they'll be able to use that better and better as time goes on until they can sustain a really good level of implementation. As a result of that, they improve child outcomes. So, for example, let's say someone is focused on post-secondary transition for students with disabilities. You have professional development that you're supporting, special educators, general educators, administrators. As a result of that, you're taking a fidelity measure of maybe communications in an IEP meeting about post-secondary transition. That'd be an interesting fidelity measure. I haven't really seen it before. Um, and then as a result of that, you see that maybe more of the students are signed up for college or career and technical education as a result of that. Those would be the child outcomes. So the intervention there is something that's preparing to improve those child outcomes, and it's pretty proximal to that. This is your APR calendar for everyone that's not a year one grantee. So you received your APR directions, and then in February, we're now doing that how-to webinar. You're going to provide your draft program measures to your project officer sometime on or before April 15th, and then they give you feedback. That's just your program measures. And the reason we do that is to ensure that you're giving all the information needed so that when we pass it off to the contractor for GEPRA, they have what they need to make their decisions. So that's why we instilled that. And then May 2nd, your APRs are due in G5. So that's your deadline. Any questions so far?
Jennifer, I want to point out that I did put that link in the chat so everybody who's with us can pick that up and go to it and watch it at your leisure.
Great. So new grantees, you should be working with your project officer now so that things are just all your measures are agreed upon with the project officer and you got it in a good place. You don't wait till April 15th to provide that. You're already working on it. Due dates, I don't set those. You and your project officer set those. And it's an iterative process. No one's ever turned in their draft measures, and on the first time, everyone's good with it. You are working to get it right, so that it's really meaningful, and it also expresses that meaning to your project officers since they're going to be reviewing it. But after you get it done the first year, I think the out years, the preceding years are going to be much easier. This is the GEPRA review progression. So these are your program measures. And one thing I wanted to point out, see where it says implementation year at the top, implementation year 2, et cetera. So you could also think of this as an initiative year. So each initiative that you're supporting should have a program measure 1, 2, 3, and 4. So say I'm thinking of a state I just met with, you have a math initiative and you have a PBIS initiative. They are separate. So the math initiative has program measure 1, 2, 3, 4. The PBIS initiative has program measure 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, say PBIS, you had already been doing some of the work. You already had partners in place. You got the SPDIG money and sorry, this was the PBIS over here. And you just just got going right away, right? So that first year you were going. So professional development started in the first year of the grant, say it was in 2022. And so by 2024, you've had 2 years of professional development. So that means you'd be in implementation or initiative year two. Say the math program, that was all new. You were still figuring things out. You were working with contractors, and it took a little bit too long that first year to get things in place. So you didn't start till the second year. So you started in 2023. In 2024, you just had 1 year of implementation for that initiative. So that's why the reason that we differentiate between the year you were funded and the year of implementation is because if you go back to this simplified theory of action, if you haven't started professional development, why would you expect to see improvement in implementation, right? If you haven't improved implementation, why would you expect to see improved child outcomes? So that's why we keep those two things separate because it doesn't always work that you get your money and you start things off. And so we want to have true measures of the impact that you're having, and that can't happen until you've got the professional development going. Any questions about that? All right. So implementation year two, program measure one, your evidence-based professional development worksheet will be reviewed by the contractor. In implementation years three, four, and five, the contractor reviews your worksheet and the fidelity measure, program measure two, and your cost measure, which is program measure three. In your final report, the contractor will look at all those things and your program measure four. So program measure four, I just met with the contractor last week. So SIP, Center to Improve Project Performance. And we made a couple of decisions that we had been kind of talking about holding off on. So one is that program measure four, they're going to grab those data and put them on the GEPRA report and give them to Congress from your final report. That said, they are going to look at it in the years before that. They're just not going to use it for the GEPRA report. So I should say it's kind of unfair in this to say that the contractor reviews just these things because really the contractors are reviewing all four, but they're not using it for GEPRA until your final report. And finally, it sounds like someone has a question. Let me just do one more thing. If you do a no cost extension and you provide a report for that no cost extension, do not need to, and you provide a report for the no cost extension, you don't need to give an EBPD worksheet. We again just made that decision last week, so things have changed. You can provide the worksheet. It's absolutely fine. But what happens is sometimes in a no cost extension, you just end up focusing on one part of your work that you haven't completed yet to reach your objectives. And so the worksheet gets a little off. Like we're not really doing that this year. Yeah. So we've seen that and it seemed like it made sense if you're in a no cost extension that you would not need to give that worksheet again. All right.
Jennifer, real
Questions?
quick in the
Yep.
chat, Selena, and I think you were talking to that, but I want to point it out. Selena asked, what if you have two cohorts, completed one, starting two?
Selena, will you tell me more about that question? I'm not sure I understand.
Sure, we had a cohort for the first 2 years of this round of funding. We kind of stopped work with them, the intensive TA and stuff, and now we're starting another cohort so at the beginning of this academic school year, so fall of 2024. So for implementation, would we be in year one with our second cohort or year four altogether?
Ah, I see what you mean. Yeah, it depends on how you write your measure. So there's just so many different ways. Since you get to write for program measure two, you get to create the program measure two, three, and four. But for just talking about program measure two, improving implementation, you get to create your own measure. So it just depends on how you write that measure. So that would be a good conversation to have not only with your evaluator, but also with your project officer about what makes the most sense for that.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer.
Mhm. other questions? Mhm. Okay, keep moving. All right, so just again, since it was new, if you're in a no-cost extension, you do not need to provide an EBPD worksheet. Again, if you've talked to your project officer about this before and they said something different, it was because we just made that decision as of last week. Um, and they just found out about it today. Um, just a related note, if you want to request a no-cost extension, and no-cost extension is to achieve the objectives you set out in your application that you have not yet reached. And if you still have money to do so, you can request that. It's a pretty easy process. There's a link on the grant management page with the no cost extension request form. You fill that out, you email it to your project officer, and the idea is that you do that sometime before the 10 days before your performance period ends. So if September 30th is the end of your performance period, which it should be for everyone, September you'd have to get it in by September 20th, but I know all my projects give it to me before that, so I doubt you'd be waiting till the last minute. So overview of the GEPRA data. Again, GEPRA data this is a requirement across all government grant programs. And Government Performance Results Act, this means we're giving data to Congress. Other folks look in the department as well, but in the end, it gets to Congress and it says how we're doing. Every program has to have a cost measure. Every program has to have a long-term measure. So our cost measure is program measure 3. Our long-term measure is program measure 4. So program measure 3 is that ongoing assistance, the dollar amounts that you spend after initial training to support implementation and sustainability. And then the program measure 4 is improving child outcomes, which of course makes sense as a long-term measure. Can't get there right away. So this provides, again, you've seen this before, not new, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But the big idea is we'll just look at meets targets. So we have to set a target each year for our GEPRA results. And GEPRA, in this case, we are just taking your program measures and we're averaging them. And that's how we get. Um, so this is initiative. So you see the number, this is the number of initiatives. So for each grant, even if you have more than one initiative, our contractor just chooses one. You could have 3 initiatives. They're just going to choose one initiative. They choose that randomly from a grant to review. And so in this instance, they looked at 31 SPDIGs initiative or initiatives. I don't know how to say that. So 31 initiatives were reviewed. Of those, 27 met the target that we, OSAP, set for you. So each year of your grant, there's a different target. So 84% of the initiatives met the target. Then program measure 2 is this next section. So they looked at 25 initiatives who had been doing professional development for at least 3 years. And 24 of those set a target for improving fidelity. 18 provided actual performance data. 13 met their target. So out of 25, it was around 50% met their target. And in the evaluators conversation earlier, um, someone raised the idea, as you get into the grant, you get better and better at setting that implementation target because you have better understanding. You have baseline data, and you can change your target for the out years if you talk to your project officer and you agree on it. We do want targets that you can reach, but are kind of hard to reach. So stretch targets, but reachable. 20% observed by outsider. Want to make sure this 46% isn't that helpful, but just making sure you're really clear. I'm going to go over this in a second about, is it a self-assessment or is someone uh, already doing it from who is external to the work. Um, we'll talk about that in a second. And then measure 2.2 is our program measure 3. And so there were 32 initiatives for that cost measure, that ongoing assistance. 32 reported the dollar amounts that they were spending, and 30 had a correct equation, and 28 actually met the target that they set for themselves. So 88% met the target. And then program measure 4, which is improving child outcomes, ignore the 113% for right now. I'm not quite sure why it shows up that way, but 17 of the initiatives had an identified student outcome or child outcome measure. 17 had the actual data for it. 17 measured. So they were saying this is a child level outcome. 17 set the target. 13 reported actual data. And of those 13, 7 met the target that they had set for themselves. Because program measure 1's the only one where we set the target for you. Everything else you set the target. So that was about 47%, and 4 had inadequate data. And again, that's why we're working on it right now, because it's not going to be till your final report that it really counts, because it's going to Congress. And so that's why we want to collect it as many years as we can so that we can work together on getting the data to the contractors that they need to make decisions. Okay, I'll stop there. Any questions? All right. So individual program measures, let's look at program measure 1 first. This is about evidence-based professional development. The target for 2024 was 82% of the initiatives meeting the target we set, and 84.4% actually met the target, so target exceeded. And this, you can see those in different initiative years, whether they made it or not, or whether they met their target or not. I put little arrows. This is the evidence-based professional development.
Well, that wasn't planned. So Jennifer must have accidentally clicked uh, leave meeting, or
Hey, John, where did I end?
let's see. I'm not totally certain.
You were showing us the PD rubric for, you had the little arrows for the items on, I think, probably.
Okay, good. Okay, so it wasn't that I wasn't gone for
Oh,
too long.
Like 10 seconds.
you're even here still, Jennifer. I thought you looked like you dropped out of the
I
participant list
did.
too.
Yeah, I
Good.
did.
Oh, okay.
Um, so okay, so these are the components from the evidence-based professional development worksheet rubric. And the ones with the arrows are the ones that had lower scores, but not a lot. I mean, we met our target. We did fine. But if we wanted areas to focus on, it would be in the training domain, 4, which is trainers are trained and coached, and 4 of the initiatives had a count of 2, which means they got scored 2. Coaching, C3, this is the coaching outcome data. So how are coaches affecting the knowledge and skills of the people they're working with, the personnel they're working with? And 2 got a score of 1, and 3 initiatives had a score of 2. And then performance assessment, D2 is about the data systems that you have in all the different levels of the education system or the early childhood system in your state. And are they talking to each other and working together? And so 5 had a count of 2. And then D3, this is about using your fidelity and outcome data and making sure it's communicated to various people and using it to make decisions. And so then let's look a little bit closer. So trainers are trained, coached, and observed. So you're talking about the training, the coaching, the procedures for observing trainers. There's a training fidelity instrument. There's a description of procedures to obtain training evaluation data, and description of how the observation, training, fidelity data, and training evaluation data were used to identify further training and coaching needed for trainers, and to inform revisions to training. And typically it's this last bullet that needs more to it, but sometimes it's the last two bullets. And then C3, coaching outcome data are collected and analyzed to assess participant knowledge and skills. So how is coaching monitored for fidelity to content and quality? To the great directors webinar we had last week with Rebecca Hornack. If you didn't get a chance to watch that, do watch the recording because she talks about all this. Description of how coaching fidelity data are used to identify potential training and coaching for coaches. Procedures to assess the knowledge and skills gained by those who are coached. Description of how coaching outcome data are analyzed by the SPDIG team, and description of how coaching outcome data are used as part of feedback loops among trainers, coaches, and coaching recipients. And then the final two are both in the data decision making domain. So D2, data systems being in place at all educational levels or all the program levels, and key data sources analyzed to connect training and coaching to fidelity of the innovation and then child outcomes. Targets and benchmarks for various types of data. This is one that often is something we can work on, targets and benchmarks. And then data collection guidance provided to the professional development sites and participants, and how our teams trained and coached using training and coaching fidelity of the innovation and child outcomes data. And then this is the fidelity and student outcome data used to inform continuous improvement in collaboration with stakeholders at multiple levels. So how are the data compiled and communicated in usable formats with various audience and stakeholders? So think like infographics, right? Impact stories that we've been talking about. How feedback loops function to inform improvement across multiple levels, and a description of how fidelity and child outcome data inform modifications to project plans and processes. So any questions about the components to watch? Okay, so we have exemplar worksheets up on our APR page. And I was just hearing this morning on the evaluators call that especially, oh shoot, let's fix this. All right. So if you go down, if you're on the APR and program measures page, you scroll down, here's the exemplars. And so you can see the worksheets for these. This is a final report. We don't yet have a final report from a 2020 and on grant to use as an exemplar. So this is, the program measures were a little bit different, but we should have one this year when the reports come in. But yeah, this is just to remind you that these exist. So far for program measure 1, just to remind you that these overview of the requirements also exist. There's pointers in here, description what the measure is, why we're doing it, how you put it together, some pointers for you, and then this provides the target for each year, and then what you put in the status chart. And then just an example, this is an example from a grant. So you use the EBPD worksheet and attach it to your APR. One idea for you is to have someone review your worksheet who doesn't know your work well, to give you feedback on what might not be clear. So any questions about program measure 1? All right. So program measure 2 is about improving implementation. And we did not meet our target this year. The target was 60% of initiatives would meet the target they'd set for themselves, and 50% met. But to the point of the evaluator who raised this is that we do, one-to-one here, but we do get a little bit better over time, it looks like folks get better at setting those targets and meeting those targets. Year 7, I think we're going to just take that out of the data. It's a little bit of a outlier. So let's get into this. Some considerations is be clear about the fidelity measure you used and ensure that it makes sense, that like they'll know it's a fidelity measure. How will they know, kind of thing. Um, if your fidelity measure is a self-assessment, like someone is doing it to themselves, a team, a teacher, whatever it happens to be, you have to describe a 20% external observation reliability check and make it clear why it's an external observation reliability check. This came up with one project where they said an external person facilitated the meeting, but it wasn't entirely clear to our contractor SIP that that meant that they were actually doing the fidelity assessment themselves. So just simple, clear language. And then, of course, think about next year's targets and talk about that with your project officer if they are appropriate. So we had made a change a few years back that we still call it implementation fidelity, but another way to think about it is it's intervention fidelity. Fidelity of, say you're doing something like MTSS. Fidelity, the process fidelity, are you doing, is the implementation team doing what they need to do, that kind of thing. Really important. We still think it's important. Give us that information as a project measure. That'd be great. But what we found in past years is that we didn't know what was happening for the child, right? Like what were they actually getting as a result of the work? And especially we're looking at child outcomes. What should be happening to improve those child outcomes? And so we need to know something that's actually happening for the child. And so in this example, not a real example, but um, if there was an initiative focused on MTSS and within MTSS literacy, how do you know the literacy intervention or program is being used with fidelity? That's the fidelity measure you'd want for program measure 2. It's proximal to the child outcome. Because if you just say, yeah, the implementation team is doing all the things that we have, the checklist to make sure that they're doing all, the procedures right, that's great, but that is very distal to this child's reading is going to improve. So what's actually happening in that instance in the classroom? So this is about just a little bit more of a description of systems versus interventions. We think they're both important, but we need for the program measure to be about what's actually happening to the child. So some things that have come up before about this, the questions of, these people have brought up, it's really hard to get these data. It's more expensive to get to that level, right? That's one way to look at it. And so some thoughts about that is could sample. This is something to talk about with your project officer, but you could sample instead of getting the whole universe. See if your project officer would be okay with that, if it makes sense for you all. There are times when, say in the instance of MTSS, there's different content at different sites. So say we're talking about schools with MTSS and one school is math, one school is behavior, one school is literacy. What do you do about that? One way to do it is look for common essential features across the different schools, different interventions. Another would be, are there benchmarks that you could just, look at as an average of who's meeting a specific benchmark? So your project officer can help you think through that if it's still a question that you're figuring out. Again, targets challenging but achievable. Look at your history or other states' history or research when possible. You set your targets for your out years, but you can also work with your project officers to change those as you learn more. So this is that reliability check that we already talked about. So I think that's it for program measure 2. And we do have Fidelity Fridays. And our next Fidelity Friday is February, I want to say it's 21st. That's obviously a Friday and it's in February. Um, Jennifer Pierce from the IMTSS or Integrated MTSS Center is going to talk about integrated MTSS fidelity, but she's going to talk about more than that. How they picked the specific MTSS features to focus on in their fidelity measure, what that's been like now that they've been using it for a little while. She's going to go deeper, and she's got some good content planned for us. In March, Rebecca Zumeta Edwards from National Center on Intensive Intervention is going to talk about intensive intervention fidelity. In April, Steve Lipscomb from the REL Central and Alexa Hudak from Oklahoma SPDIG is going to talk about collecting fidelity data and some strategies for that. And again, they're going to go bigger than that, but that's the key information they said they'll share. So any questions about Program Measure 2?
Jennifer, this is Jason. I have a question for you.
Sure.
I don't think that this is any like big shock or surprise or anything, but I'm just curious what others do. So I think historically, when I've worked with states, I've always used like the March 1st to February 28th timeframe as far as the window that we reported on in the next years. But of course,
Mhm.
for the implementation fidelity measure, program measures, that inserts some complications because you're not on one unified school year, right? So you may
Right.
have two different sets of schools because they were
Yeah.
cohorts, or you may have moved on to another part of your intervention. So the fidelity measure changes differently. And I'm just curious, have other states ever like reported by school year rather than by the programming year so that it was one unified school year for their program measure?
Yeah, they have, and there is a way that you can provide data after the APR close, like you
Hmm.
provide something and then you can update it later.
Yeah.
It's really something you talk with your project officer
Yeah.
about. It's kind
Okay.
of a
Of course, the
individual.
complication becomes like, it bounces it back like one
Yeah,
full school year if you're doing it that way.
yeah,
But yeah. Okay. So it has
yeah.
been done both ways. Thanks,
Yeah,
Jennifer.
no, and I did at one point in time, the person who in the front office was responsible for a lot of the APR procedures said, "Oh, could we please move it back so that they have a chance to collect end of year data for schools?" And they gave me a lot of reasons why it can't be done. One is just all the procedures that have to take place because we make money decisions for the next year based on the APRs. But it makes it more challenging for everyone for sure. All right, good question. So program measure 3, this is about funds. This is a cost measure. And the big idea is that we want fidelity to increase and to sustain the effective use of the SPDIC supported practices. And once upon a time, when I first came into the program, long, long, long time ago, there was a measure, it was like, how many people are you reaching? And of course we changed that. And because it's not just we talked about this the other day, like it's not just spray and pray, right? We're not just sending things out everywhere. We're doing deep work because we want folks to be able to use it well and we want them to keep on using it. And to do that, you need coaching, mentoring, supporting the use of data, et cetera. So that's what Program Measure 3 is about. So we did exceed our target this year, which was 85%. We had 87.5%. And you can see implementation years who met the target and who didn't. And that's it for program. I didn't have a lot, we met our target. I didn't get a lot of questions about it, but I'll stop there. Does anyone have any questions about Program Measure 3? So Program Measure 4, when I met with the contractor, SIP, they said one of the issues they have with Program Measure 4 is that for a single initiative, there will be multiple outcome measures, and they're not sure which one to look at. So each initiative can only have one program measure 1, one program measure 2, one program measure 3, and one program measure 4. Any other outcome measures, just label it project. But just make sure you have one program measure. 4, they are collecting data each year just to, they put it in that chart that they send to me and I share with the project officers. It gives us good information and helps us work with you. And it helps to ensure that you know what to do for your final report. So you will, as many years as you have those data, please do provide them. Um, and again, you get to set your own target for this one. You get to create your own measure working with your project officer. So questions about program measure 4. The big idea in that first bullet is that you think about what that intervention is that you're supporting, the practice or program that is going to improve the child outcome. So there's a real significant connection there. What would you expect to see different that you can collect within the life of your grant? So any questions? All right. So we have rubric B and their APR fillable form. Rubric B is just, and both of these are just to help you as you're putting things together. So rubric A is just about program measure 1, and it's specifically um, evidence-based professional development worksheet that's in there. This is the overall, you know, what the contractor is looking for, basically. All of rubric B is what they use, the contractor. So we're just giving you the information that they have. So you got to make sure you specify what year the initiative is in. Again, we're talking about implementation year of the initiative. Program measure 2, we talked about the fidelity measure being clear, and it should measure at the very least the presence or absence of core features. Setting a target, giving information about those meeting the target. And did you meet the target? And then there's that reliability check. There's information about what the ongoing technical assistance activities look like for program measure 3, and then also the equation. And program measure 4, just the basics of what you're providing. And then the APR fillable form, this is basically the same information in a different, a little bit more technologically savvy way. And then there's the percent scoring 3 or more. And so these have some of this. And so some of the project officers use this as they're reviewing your APR to take the data, and it's just providing you another possibly supportive tool or template, but you do not need to turn it into us. We're just in case it's helpful. All right. So again, April 15th is the deadline for submitting your draft program measures to your project officer for review, unless you are a first-year grantee. Large available balances, for what we understand, is that if you have more than 70% or 70% or more of your annual budget in your G5 account, then that would be a large available balance. You may need to complete an SF 424 financial form, but we don't know for sure if that's the case. Even if it's in G5, the financial form, you don't have to fill it out unless we tell you you do. Just a heads up on that. Your APR section B, please do ensure you provide a strong description of reasons you haven't been able to spend down your funds and how you will do so in the next year, etc. So in your performance report, if you have been doing this for a while, you don't need to stay on. You know all this information. This is the basic stuff about creating a report. And you can have 15 minutes back, or you're welcome to stay on. So an annual performance report, or APR, is due every year of your grant in early May. The final performance report is due within 90 days of the last day of your performance period. So you say September 30th is your last day, then you have till December 30th to upload your final report in G5. The final report is really just your last annual performance report. There's really not much difference to it. So you're going to check annual performance or final. And then we, just as Jason was bringing up, you talk about how the day you began, say October 1st, and then you went through February 28th, those are the dates. If you're in your second through your final year, it starts March 1st and then goes through February 28th. So budget expenditures, work with your business or grants office. And just a strategy is to meet monthly with the office who is responsible for the funding to make sure that the numbers that you have match up with the numbers that they have. I know there have been a lot of issues of turnover and folks just kind of learning on the job in this. And the more you meet with them, the more you're going to figure out what they know and they don't know and help them with that. And there's a whole, are these complete data? No, it will be at your final report. And then the authorized representative cannot be you. So if you're the project director, you are not the authorized representative. It needs to be certified by somebody else. They're signing on behalf of your institution, and you can't have that duplication of responsibilities. The executive summary sheet, this is the highlights from what you've been doing within the last year of the grant, things people should know about, flagging like, hey, we had a great impact here. And then this is what the status chart looks like. This is what you'll be giving to your project officer with your program measures, your draft program measures, and then your project objectives. So one project objective per page. And then that's where you put the measure types. This really catches people up. Just as long as I've been in the department, which is a little more than 18 years, this has been hard for folks. So it's either a program measure, which we just talked about with the GEPRA, or a project measure, and you have to ensure that you say the correct measure type. So that's what it can look like. And then the quantitative data, you either use the raw number or you have a ratio and a percentage. So you never do all three. So either the raw number when it makes the most sense, or often it's you give a ratio and a percentage. I know sometimes, your target is you're just trying to get a percentage and that's okay. But then the actual performance data should be, the real numbers and the percentage. So in the explanation of progress section, so if we look back on the status chart, the whole status chart, you see that bottom explanation of progress, include qualitative and data collection information. So these are the questions you should be answering. What changes in the data occurred? What activities were undertaken to achieve these targets? If the targets are not met, possible reasons, and how will you be improving on it in the next year, and so on. And then section B and C, there are directions for each of those sections. Section B, really important. You need to talk about any unexpended funds, how you're going to use them in the next budget period, and then, of course, all the others. But I just want to flag that for you because it's important for large available balances and any changes that you anticipate in your next year. Section C, this is current partners, if anything has changed. Any changes you wish to make in the grants activities, and also you want to talk about that with your project officer, and anything that just doesn't fit in other sections is too. It's additional information. So 524B, that's your annual performance report, goes in G5/G6. Someone called it G5.5 the other day. I approved that. Got a signed cover sheet in there, your final performance report. So there's in your instructions, there's a few things that says about final performance reports, not much in terms of changes. And then reporting requirements during the no cost extension period, make sure you talk with your project officer about that. And your OSEP project officer is available.
There's a comment in the chat from Tina saying, just an FYI, for any year one folks, this section A has to be entered individually manually. You do not upload the chart as you can with other required documents. Is that true? Is
So
that still
section,
true, Jennifer, is the
so
final
you're
one?
talking about the evidence-based professional development worksheet or something else?
Talking about the chart with the measures that you just showed, section A, B,
Ah,
C. So my first year, I didn't know this, and so I just want to give
okay.
everybody a heads up because it takes a lot longer because you have to enter all the percentages and everything manually versus just
Ah,
uploading the chart.
got it.
That's still accurate, correct?
I never do it myself, so I think that's still how it goes, but does anyone else have information?
That's how it was last year. You had to put the performance measure in, hit from a drop down for the measure type, and then enter the data in to those boxes that you have the green arrows pointing to.
Thank you.
The hard copy forms that you all provide us don't align with what's online in G5.
Ooh, that's
So
good to know. Okay.
yeah, so it doesn't order things in the same way. And so I
Mm,
would suggest people just do it in G5 and print out the drafts before you submit and work at it that way.
yeah. And if you feel like if you email me and tell me I'll work on it from my side. Sorry about that.
Jennifer, this is Karen.
Uh-huh.
Um, Another thing that might be helpful to new people is on this particular section, when you go
Mm-hmm.
down to enter the narrative component, we
Mm-hmm. The
usually put
explanation for us.
we usually put a note that says, see attached file due to length limitations, and then we upload the narrative part.
Got it. Yep. I think a lot of people do that.
All right. I thought maybe some new people might not know that they can do that.
That's right. Good. Thank you. This is helpful because, yeah, as I said, I don't do that side of things, and so I don't always know when there's been a change in the last year or the best strategies to use. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Um, targets, established targets, and measurable indicator. You all do a really good job of it. So I feel I don't need to take too much time on this. This is just kind of more universal guidance. So we got the project objectives or project measures, and these are often, if you're new, you've provided project measures in your application. So looking at those, making sure those still make sense. Maybe there's some new ones that your team has come up with as you've been working together. And you want to think about for a high quality performance measure, what will change, how much will change, who will achieve the change, and when will the change take place? I always think it's a lot like IEPs, right? Um, activities such as holding a meeting or holding meetings are not performance measures. And you want to, not typically to make it most meaningful, you don't want to have too many objectives and or too many measures because you can kind of get lost in that. So what's really meaningful? And every once in a while, I see a project that makes it kind of like their measures are like their Gantt chart. And Gantt chart is really important. Project management is really important, but how will you tell your story in a clear and meaningful way? And that's it. So final questions or tips for others. We have 6 minutes.
Jennifer, one of the tips I have is don't wait until May 2nd to upload everything. You
Good
need to
tip.
go a few days beforehand in case there's a bunch of people trying to do it at one time or you have technical difficulties.
Good. I like that tip. That is just true for everything in the government, right? You never know what's going to happen the day things are due.
Yeah, and if you aren't in the same office, another tip as the
Mm,
person who's your authorized representative, get on their schedule to sign your signature form ahead of time as well.
good. Yep, that can be challenging for folks. You're welcome. Okay. Thanks, John, for organizing us. It's always a pleasure working with you all. Again, your project officer is there for you to discuss a lot of these things. And if something's ever happening with the program measures, since I do a lot of that work, I can always come into a conversation as well. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks,
Welcome.
y'all.
Bye.
Yes,
Bye.
thanks.
Thank you.